From the studios of Farm Journal Broadcast, this is Ag Day.
Christmas is over. Now, some folks are celebrating the end of the season as Southern California battles high winds and dry conditions, causing flames from wildfires to grow.
Take it seriously and evacuate. Your life will depend on it.
Others prepare for another round of snow and cold, and it's considered one of the most important reports of the year.
I think the trade does feel quite confident.
What we could see for corn and soybeans as we put the final tally on those 2024 crops right now on Ag Day.
Ag Day is brought to you by Pioneer. Great performance in the field makes Pioneer brand corn #1 in America. For a winning season, it's Pioneer brand corn. Your best year starts here.
Good morning, I'm Clint Griffiths. Happening right now, market watchers and producers are awaiting some big reports. Included in the release on Friday is the annual crop production summary. Ag Day's Michelle Rook joins me. Michelle, we'll finally get to see if the 2024 corn and soybean crops were really as big as many thought.
Clinton, Friday, USDA will provide the final production numbers and incorporate those into the January WASDE, but it's only one of several reports released, including winter wheat seedings and quarterly stocks. Now, this is the most important report day of the year, and the trade is watching how production and demand will impact the final ending stocks. And remember, quarterly stocks can often provide a surprise as well. Estimates for USDA's big data dump on Friday have the trade expecting a slight cut in yield and production for both corn and soybeans.
For the most part, the trade does look for a small decline in corn numbers, a drop from 183.1 bushels per acre to 182.7. We agree with that. We're at 182.6. So the starting point for corn is a lightly lower production discussion. For soybeans, the trade feels a minimal decline, maybe 8 million bushels lower for production.
Nelson says a change in demand is unlikely for wheat or beans, with wheat carryout projected at 800 million bushels and soybeans at 457 million bushels, down just 13 million. But corn demand could be raised, cutting ending stocks.
I do think that we're going to have increases in demand for corn. We should see ethanol grind go up a little more. We should see exports go up a little bit more.
I think the trade does feel quite confident. We will see these numbers on the corn side drop below 1.7 billion bushels. Keep in mind, we started the year at 2.1. So we certainly have changed the corn narrative quite a bit here on this discussion.
On the South American crop, it may be too early for USDA to make big revisions in corn or bean production.
USDA here in January still takes a fairly conservative view. I think that they will likely leave Argentina alone. And of course, you know, we do have concerns about Argentina as well as the southern Brazilian provinces of Paraná and Rio Grande do Sul.
Winter wheat seedings estimates are close to last year with 33.5 million acres for all winter wheat. The bigger story will be spring seedings.
So as a net, we're looking for nothing more than a minor decline for all winter wheat of just 24,000 acres.
Quarterly stocks will also be released with estimates at 12.15 billion bushels for corn, close to last year, but 3.23 billion for soybeans and 1.57 billion for wheat, which are both up from a year ago. I'm Michelle Rook reporting for Ag Day.
A developing story we're following reports that the U.S. will start importing feeder cattle from Mexico again the week of January 20th. Now, Farm Journal Washington analyst Jim Wiesmeyer says his sources are telling him the imports will be slow at first. That's due to the need to put in place new protocols. Now, you'll remember APHIS suspended imports of live cattle and bison from Mexico back in late November. It followed the detection of New World screwworm along Mexico's southern border. Now, Wiesmeyer says the temporary suspension had an impact on the U.S. cattle market, resulting in up to 300,000 fewer head being imported. It also pushed prices for feeder cattle and calves higher here at home. Meanwhile, USDA is also expanding livestock import restrictions in regard to the New World screwworm threat following a confirmed case in Belize. Late last month, APHIS suspended livestock imports from that country. The exceptions include dogs with health certificates and horses that meet strict treatment and quarantine conditions. The New World screwworm was eradicated from the U.S. back in 1966. The South is bracing for another winter storm, one that's forecast to spread snow and ice across 1,400 miles of the southern U.S. And while one meteorologist says even though we've been talking about the arrival of La Nina, we aren't in it yet and probably won't be this year. USDA meteorologist Brad Rippey says we drifted into a pattern several weeks ago that's consistent with La Nina. The episodic cold outbreaks we're seeing is a trademark of that weather pattern. And the Pacific storm system's riding the boundary between colder air to the north and the warmer air to the south. Well, it's sparking these significant winter storms this week.
And I think the reason for that is even though surface temperatures in the equatorial Pacific are not cold enough to officially define La Nina, we've got incredibly warm water surrounding that cool La Nina zone in the equatorial region. And I think the difference in temperature is making up for what it lacks in terms of absolute cool temperatures in the equatorial Pacific. That's a very confusing way of saying that the atmosphere is acting like it's La Nina, even though it's not quite cool enough in the equatorial Pacific to reach that official definition of La Nina.
Rippey expects this active southern storm track to continue for the rest of January, along with the bursts of bitter cold. Parts of the southern plains all the way to the lower Mississippi Valley are seeing snow, rain, freezing rain, and ice. Meteorologist Jack Van Meter is tracking it for us. Jack?
Yeah, that's exactly right, Clinton. A lot of the country got that first big taste of winter with that large storm that moved through at the beginning of the week. And as we can see, that snow depth from that system is really holding all the way out from parts of Kansas, actually all the way out through West Virginia, all the way to the East Coast. And we can see there's a pretty nice corridor of up to 3 to 6 inches with that system. So again, a lot of folks still seeing that winter outlook, but again, just around that, a lot of flurries out there and a lot of traces of snow, especially for our higher elevations. We're talking in the Rocky Mountain states and also to the east there. A lot of folks actually seeing really high snowpack just because temperatures have been so cold, especially for this time of year. Of course, it's January, but it's not supposed to be this cold. And again, the reason for that, we are seeing some more snow, and actually we'll be seeing a little bit more. And Kathy Fortune ranches in the Badlands of South Dakota, keeping her cattle well fed as the snow currently falls. She says they started the day with a good hearty breakfast. We'll have more in your forecast coming up.
Fierce wildfires are raging in the Los Angeles area, sending people running from their burning homes through flames, high winds, and towering clouds of smoke. And as Maribel Gonzalez reports, thousands of firefighters are battling at least 4 separate blazes.
Oh my God, you guys.
Los Angeles County is now in the crosshairs of 4 massive separate fires. Thousands of acres ravaged and counting. Tens of thousands of people ordered to evacuate.
Take it seriously and evacuate. Your life will depend on it.
Some civilian fatalities have been reported, and fire officials say there's little to no containment this hour. High winds, massive walls of fast-moving flames, and rough, hilly terrain are stretching fire crews to their limits.
We have several firefighters and civilian injuries that have been reported.
Many evacuees had to abandon their vehicles and escape on foot, while some residents tried to save their homes with garden hoses.
You think you're going to be out there with your little garden hose, stopping a conflagration with flames 80 feet high and 90-mile-an-hour winds. You're not going to be helping.
Actor James Woods is one of many who lost a home in the Palisades fire.
It just finally moved into about 3 months ago. All the smoke alarms are going off, so that's hard.
President Joe Biden visiting LA County Wednesday, getting briefed on statewide reinforcements being called in.
I contacted the Governor's Office of Emergency Services. We requested 250 additional engines into LA County with 1,000 personnel.
In the Pacific Palisades, I'm Maribel Gonzalez reporting for Ag Day.
A new check of farmer sentiment shows the mood among farmers drifted lower at the end of last year. The Ag Economy Barometer coming in with a reading of 136 in December. That's a dip of 9 points from the previous month. Now, the survey from Purdue University and the CME Group, however, shows that producers remain optimistic about the future.
The decline in the index was mostly attributable to a decline in the current condition index, which fell 13 points compared to last month to a reading of just 100. That leaves that index 5 points higher, however, than it was in October. The future expectation index also declined, but it fell just 8 points compared to last month, and that left that index still 29 points higher than it was in October.
Surveyors say farmers' future outlook for their farms and the ag sector remain noticeably more positive than at the end of summer. And they say that's due to expectations for policy shifts following the November 2024 election. Commodity markets took a breath on Wednesday ahead of USDA's big data dump. We'll take a look at that coming up next. And later we're off to Germany, where the pinnacle of Christmas past is being tossed in good fun today in the country.
Ag Day is brought to you by Germinator Closing Wheels. Germinator steel closing wheels provides a 13 bushel advantage per acre in no-till and a 7 bushel advantage per acre in conventional. Do you have enough room in your bin to switch to the Germinator?
Grains and cattle push lower midweek. Michelle Rook is back with more in Markets Now.
Grain and livestock futures all in negative territory on the close on Wednesday. Mark Schultz is with us. And Mark, let's talk about the grain trade. I know we've been positioning ahead of the big reports coming up here on Friday in the grains, but how much did the higher dollar and South America weather have to do with the action?
Well, I think a combination of maybe a little bit of both here, but for the most part, I still think the market is more focused on the weather in South America as far as price direction. In here, we had a warmer, drier trend that has started to unfold in far southern Brazil, and that's expanding just a little bit, moving into Paraguay. And then we're getting it on the drier side in Argentina. Now, the forecast just looks like it's going to stay that way for about another 8 to 10 days. And then there is a hint in the 10 to 15-day outlook of some better rain chances coming in for both southern Brazil and parts of Argentina.
We recently got topped out in corn and soybeans at resistance areas. What would it take either from a South American weather perspective or from the reports to get above those levels?
Well, the weather would have to stay warm, dry in South America, and the moisture that was in the forecast today on the extended outlook would have to be out of it when we get to Friday. And then you're going to have something more on the friendly side for the production and or stocks numbers have to come in even lower than what the trade is expecting. That's what it would take to get something to move higher for the grains.
Cattle market had a pretty good setback on Wednesday. That market overbought. Is this just routine profit taking or not?
Well, I think the key here is going to be on the cash market. Keep close watch on it. We had an aggressive cash prices last week. The Packers got aggressive on Friday afternoon. Which I heard some strong talk here of higher cash prices again this week. Futures had a correction. I would just say, we're going up and we've been going up pretty nicely here without much resistance. And today was the first big pullback that we've seen. So we'll see if it's just a pullback. We should have 1.5 day correction and see it start to bounce back up. Watch the cash market for that marketing direction or price direction.
Thanks so much, Mark Schultz, North Star Commodity. We'll have more Ag Day coming up.
Watch Markets Now with Michelle Rook on the Farm Journal YouTube channel, keeping you updated throughout the day on the markets at the open, midday, and close. Find out what moved the markets today and what to expect the market to do next.
Of course, we're keeping a very close eye on the situation that's starting to unfortunately unfold in Southern California, specifically around Los Angeles and a little bit north of San Diego. The Storm Prediction Center has put out that elevated and critical fire risks for this region because of the hot Santa Ana winds. A lot of warm and dry air, more importantly, rushing down the mountains and really just fueling the flames down there. As we could see, we're looking at 10 to 20% relative humidity with winds. This is winds, not gusts, winds at 20 to 30 miles an hour. But unfortunately, we have been seeing some of those gusts getting close to 80 miles an hour. So a very scary situation that we are continuing to watch over there. As for the rest of the country, we are looking at another winter storm that is actually going to start picking up steam actually later today in the afternoon and last through much of Friday. So let's go ahead and look at the snowfall estimates first, and then we'll look at the radar reflectivity values of that system. So again, starting around 3 o'clock in the afternoon today, the system is going to start forming just to the pretty much centered actually around Dallas, and actually going to start right around the Red River region there. As we can see, looking at some pretty heavy snow totals starting to move out into Arkansas, and actually going to take a rather similar path to the system that we saw earlier in the week. And again, we can see that system start to form with some Gulf moisture and really start to push off to the east coast as well before a lot of high pressure is set to fill in the void, and a lot of folks actually going to start cooling down for much of the weekend. Pueblo, Colorado, 35 degrees and low of 10 degrees. A little windy out there. Clarksville, Tennessee, 37 degrees, low of 28 degrees. Going to be seeing a lot of sun. And finally, Pine Bluff, Arkansas, 37 degrees and low of 30 degrees.
What are the key red meat export markets for the next administration? We'll hear what the experts have to say next. And later, don't throw a fit, throw your tree. This wild and unusual competition is perfectly poised for your participation today in the country. What will the new Trump administration bring when it comes to trade? Well, the U.S. Meat Export Federation says 2 areas will be of key interest. They are Canada and Mexico. The Vice President of Economic Analysis for the U.S. Meat Export Federation says the U.S. needs to maintain tariff-free trade with those countries, but she says there are also opportunities for growth in the U.K.
That is partially because there was, FTA attempts in the previous Trump administration, but also just because the UK is the only major importer of which the US has basically no market share. And it's a one-way street with trade. And we actually lost access through Brexit. We lost our duty-free access because the high-quality beef quota stayed with Europe.
Boer says right now we basically have no access into the UK for US beef, which could be a $2 billion market. The comment period is now open for people to review new draft guidelines for the labeling of plant-based alternative foods. The FDA this week releasing draft guidance saying consumers should be able to easily see and determine the plant source when looking at the name of the food on the label. Currently, there are no established guidelines for the labeling of plant-based alternative meat products, and the agency says the guidelines aim to answer several questions, including what should be included in the statement of identity for a plant-based alternative food, along with considerations when companies use a modified spelling. Public comments are being accepted through early May. Head over to drovers.com and find this story to share your comments with the FDA. Well, it's just about time to throw out that 2024 Christmas tree. And we mean really throw it. At least that's what these folks are doing. We'll tell you why next. Christmas is over, so what do you do with that real tree? Forget the curbside drop-off or the wood chipper. Some folks in Germany have a clever idea. You're looking at the 17th annual Christmas Tree Throwing World Championships. Competitors were judged in 3 areas: distance, height and slinging of the trees. Now, the tradition is derived from something in Sweden called Knutfest. And despite the cold, rainy weather creating a muddy field, contestants, both young and old, showed off their skills, tossing the trees. Now, some of them look like they've done this a few times, and as you would expect in Germany, they turn it into a big event, complete with bratwurst. And if you don't want to sling your tree, you can just throw it on a nearby bonfire to help keep everyone at the event warm. And that's all the time we have this morning. We're sure glad you tuned in. From all of us here at Ag Day, I'm Clinton Rivas. Have a great day.